Welcome to today's Town Hall on the NAEP background questions. I'm Eileen Weiser, a member of the National Assessment Governing Board and chair of its Reporting and Dissemination Committee. The Governing Board is pleased to host today's presentation and participant feedback. Before we start, I will briefly run through today's agenda. I will provide a brief overview of NAEP and the assessment background questions. Then Larry Feinberg, Assistant Director of Reporting and Analysis for the Governing Board staff, will provide an overview of the expert panel that was developed by the Governing Board to make recommendations on improving the background questions. He will then walk through the recommendations provided by the expert panel. Next, we will shift to an open participant discussion and ask you all for your feedback on the report and the Board's efforts to make the background questions of greater use and value. To start, I would like to provide a brief introduction of the Governing Board and NAEP. The Governing Board is an independent bipartisan board that sets policy for the National Assessment of Educational Progress, also called NAEP. The NAEP assessment results are reported to the country as the nation's report card. As most of you know, NAEP is the largest ongoing nationally representative assessment of student performance in the United States at grades 4, 8, and 12 across numerous subjects such as reading, math, writing, science, and geography. NAEP provides student achievement data for the nation, states, and 21 urban school districts. Now, I'll briefly go over the NAEP background questions. For each NAEP assessment, data are collected from students, teachers, and schools based on their responses to background questions. These questions are designed to help in understanding student achievement. On your screen, you will now see an example of a NAEP background question that addresses an at-home student achievement factor. Students are asked how often they read for fun on their own time or talk with their friends or family about something they have read. On this slide, students were asked how often they performed a variety of class activities, such as discussing events in the news that are related to what they are learning in science class or presenting what they learned about science to their class. This is an example of a background question designed to collect information about in-class student achievement factors. Now, I'd like to introduce Larry Feinberg, Assistant Director of Reporting and Analysis for the Governing Board. He will provide an overview of the expert panel committee members, followed by a summary of the expert panel's report and recommendations titled The NAEP Background Questions, an Underused National Resource.
Thank you very much, Eileen. I'm the member of the board staff that actually worked with this panel. As Eileen said, the panel was created really because of the situation where so many of these questions were being asked of students, teachers, schools, but so little of them were being used in the reports. And they were meant to advise us about how to make better use of the existing questions we have and then propose other additional questions and topics that could be useful for understanding student achievement and also would be policy relevant for helping to develop education policy. The next slide, please. These are the members of the panel, and the chairman was Marshall Smith, otherwise known as Mike, who was a former U.S. Undersecretary of Education, also a former dean of the Stanford Graduate School of Education. And you can see the other members. There's only 6 of them, but there's a wide range, really, of backgrounds, people who've used NAEP, people who are researchers, people involved with policy. Sharon Lewis is the research director at the Council of Great City Schools. Bob Hauser, you see there, is an executive there now at the National Research Council. He used to be a professor at the University of Wisconsin. Next slide, please. The one after that, I guess. And that's the title of the report they issued, NAEP Background Questions, Underused Resource, National Resource, and actually was developed over about a 4-month period. This was where they got together one big meeting, invited other people there, a great many people who had expertise in these questions, and then they themselves came with considerable background about it, and then they produced the report. Next slide, please. And the report begins really with a rehearsal of things that some of what the background questions can do and what they are doing, what they can do, that they describe the resources available in the school and in the home, actually, to support learning They can be used to track, and they have in the past to some degree, changes that are done in the schools, changes in curriculum and technology and education policy. They could also be used to monitor student motivation out of school learning. There's some questions of that possible. There could be more. And the fourth possible use is to benchmark the high-performing states and urban districts and those who've made high gains in the last few years or whatever period looking at, to identify the factors that differentiate the performance in these with performance elsewhere. And actually that was one of the original motivations for the NAEP state assessments. And it actually, if this comes to pass, we would parallel the analyses that are now have been undertaken by the international assessments, the PISA and the TIMSS. Next, please. But they say, even though it could be doing these things, currently the background questions are an underused resource. The report cards themselves, the printed NAEP reports, and the main presentations online have very little information on the student that come from the background questionnaires. There are very few special reports that use these background questionnaires. One was National Indian Education Study. In the past there have been some, but very few recently, hardly any recently. And because the background questions aren't really used much in reporting, the primary source of access to them for the public is online through the NAEP Data Explorer, which is really a very great online resource, but it's fairly sophisticated to use it. And professional researchers and others, some reporters who want to spend the time can do it, but for the general run of the public, educators, policymakers, it's time-consuming. It isn't used very much. Next slide, please. And then they make recommendations, what to do from here. And the recommendations come in four areas. Ask important questions, improve the accuracy of what NAEP measures, make the sampling more efficient, and then number four, the payoff, would be to reinstitute the meaningful analysis and reporting using these background questions. And the next slide, please. And then in each area, a little more detail about it, for the first one, about asking the important questions, the schema they have would be, and some of this is done now, but this would be to try to do it more carefully, that to do these really around coherent groups of questions where there's a sort of theoretical backdrop for them, and not just a scattershot. Again, it isn't a scattershot now, but there are things that might be of interest to people rather than being a thematic whole. And so you have a core. Then the notion would be to have questions that be rotated. They could be used in different years, and one year have them, then next year don't. And then for the policy-relevant questions, there they have a plan for like a 6-year sequence of these questions, with a new topic being introduced every 2 years and then extending for the following 4, so it'd be 6 years for each. And then they propose 3 topics for the first run-out. One would be the implementation of the Common Core state standards, not whether they're good or not, but what's being done in response to them. The second is the issue of teacher evaluations, which is of current interest. And the third would be online learning. Next one, please. Then they want to strengthen the validity, reliability, and coordination of the measures, and they want to take new steps to make sure the questions are valid, that they, in fact, give the information on the topics that they purport to be covering, that they're reliable. In other words, the terms that are imprecise, that the answers are consistent about them, people understand what they're doing when they're answering the questions. And the other proposal is that the NAEP try to coordinate the questions with the international assessment, PISA and TIMSS, and with the other domestic programs that NCS has. There's a school and staffing survey. There are other surveys that NCS runs. And the international coordination would allow states and districts participating in NAEP to know directly how they stack up on questions that are part of the international assessments. Next slide, please. So the third area would be to, obviously they want to ask more questions and make it a richer package of background questions. But to do this without having an extraordinary amount of time, they realize that there has to be some duplicate. There has to be eliminating some questions So they want to eliminate those that duplicate what's in there now. And they do mention a candidate of this, which is the race ethnicity question, which is asked both of students and comes in school records. Then they want to rotate questions, have different questions, different times. Spiraling the sample means to, in fact, cut the sample in different parts and give some questions part of the sample, some in another part of it. And then they do propose expanding student questionnaire length. They don't spell out how much longer to make it. The implication is not too much longer, but that's a substantial issue. Next slide, please. And then the final area of recommendations is to reinstitute, to bring back the analysis and regular reporting of the background questions, and really through two vehicles. One would be in the reports themselves, but by having more tables, and it wouldn't necessarily be the print report, could also be online, having tables and discussion of the findings for the background questions. And the second one would be special reports that use the background questions and give tabulations and analysis of what's found. And I think that's it. Oh yes, then implementation recommendations. Pardon me. They have a plan of how to do it. And actually, they propose, this is somewhat inside baseball, that the governing board have one committee to monitor the background questions rather than two, as we do now. Then for the special reports, they propose priority three, the learning opportunities in school, be resources, class size, teacher training, the opportunities out of school for learning, and the third report about benchmarking high performers, picking out the high performers and doing some analysis of what distinguishes them. And then they want to move ahead with the sort of nuts and bolts of how you organize them, of having new questions in the core, rotated background questions, and greater efforts to validity, reliability, and improve the sampling efficiency, which means the spiraling and different questions. And then the last one, efforts with the online tools to make them better. That they're pretty good now, and the effort would be there's some specific suggestions for making them more useful. So that, maybe not in a nutshell, is what the panel recommends. And now back to Eileen.
Thank you, Larry. Now we would like to ask participants for feedback on the report and its recommendations. We will hear from as many of you as possible during the remainder of the hour-long time frame reserved for the event. If we are not able to address your comments during our time together, please know that we will provide other options for submitting feedback at the end of the hour. Dean, will you please provide participants with instructions on how to ask a question?
Yes, thank you, Eileen. Comments will be taken both over the phone and through the Q&A box located on the bottom right side of your screen. To make a verbal comment over the phone, we ask that you please provide your name, title, affiliation, and location before making a comment. Participants wishing to make a verbal comment should select the hand icon button on your WebEx screen. This is located over to the right-hand side in the participant panel, the attendee listing. And when you are finished speaking, please select the hand button again to lower your hand. If we can do a quick exercise, I'd ask everyone that is participating to go ahead and click on the raised hand button, and we'll make sure that you are comfortable selecting the raised hand button, and go ahead and lower it when you're done. So if we can do a quick exercise, that would be great. Excellent. Thank you very much. If you wish to send in your comment via the Q&A box, please select all panelists under the Send To drop-down. Once you've entered in your comment, please click and send. That is, please click Send to submit. Written comments should be no more than 250 characters, and we will hear from as many participants as possible during today's event. If you have any technical issues, please refer to the confirmation email or call 866-229-3239. Back to you, Eileen.
Thanks, Dean. As we begin the queue for comments, we will be asking questions, and I want to once again ask you to hit your raised hand or to type in your questions in the Q&A section. We have a number of different kinds of participants today, including state NAEP coordinators. Some of these questions I probably will ask them specifically to comment on because the background questions are used by many people, but we're curious as to how the NAEP state coordinators are seeing them used. The first question we'd like to collect information on is your general view of the report.
Great. Thank you, Eileen. Our first question is from Joe McCrary with WestEd. Joe, go ahead with your comment or question, please.
Yes, good morning, everyone, and thank you. My general view of this report is I was very glad to read it. I'm glad to see thought being put into using the background questions and the background variables, because it's more than just survey questions. It's to really expand the use, because this really is one of the, I think this is the largest single student-level data collection in the United States. So again, I'm very glad to have seen this report and to read it. My question is, what has been the reaction by NCES on the reports? Because in the past, I believe they've been pretty restrictive on the background questions.
Joe, thank you so much for your comment and your question. Cornelia, could you respond to him, or perhaps Eileen?
I will. This is Cornelia. Oh, I'm probably still muted.
No.
You're fine.
Oh, I'm not muted. Okay, good. We have had a written response to NCS from NCS to the report, and it will be included in the board briefing materials that will be provided to the board at their May meeting. So it will be part of what Eileen and the members of her committee will discuss at that May meeting. They responded quite positively to some of the things, and then there are other things that they'd want to hold back on, but I don't think it's necessarily the purpose of this call to go over what their response was. But as you might have expected, Joe, it was a mix of positive and let's not go too fast down this row. One of their concerns, Eileen will ask about later, it is the amount of additional student time that might be involved.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Eileen, we do not have any written comments on this question.
Thank you. So then we're going to go on to question number 2. What are some of the points with which you particularly agree? One of the things that I will be asking, and I'm hoping that our NAEP coordinators will be interested in chatting this through, is how are you using the current questions? Are states able to pick their way through the information and use it in any way to inform instructions? I'm not seeing any questions on this one, so what I would like to do is to move on to discussion question number 3. What are some of the points with which you particularly disagree? It looks like our special panel did a great job. Moving on to slide number 4, or discussion question number 4, what priorities would you suggest for implementing the panel recommendations? Are there issues that you think really need to come to the forefront quickly? Certainly there are questions that we see from the governing board perspective that would seem to be important, but we're very interested to hear how you would feel about special reports or just improving the background question design.
Okay, we have a question or a comment now from Beth DeLuca. Beth, go ahead, please. Beth, are you there?
Yes, I just sent in a chat, but I thought what I most advocate in the report was developing a valid SES measure for NAEP. I think we should continue to move forward with that research. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any additional thoughts?
Yes, actually, Eileen, Joe McCrary with WestEd again has a thought to share.
Yeah, I really like the 4th point about reinstituting the meaningful analyses and reporting, and especially by highlighting the Common Core. I think to the degree that we can really address that early on will establish the relevance of the NAEP background questions for future research and kind of really ingrain this in the process so that it lasts a long time and so that it does get used by researchers.
Thank you.
I'm a State Board of Ed member in Michigan, and we're certainly seeing a lot of, just intensity of inspection of Common Core, how it's going to match up, what states are going to be going through to accommodate it and to use it meaningfully. Are there other comments or concerns about Common Core that NAEP could be focusing on in the next 5 years that would be especially important to anybody on the phone right now or watching the webinar? Then, because you know how these webinars work, we ask you certain things on slides, and then we start throwing in extra material because we're really curious about other things, too. We have some remaining time in the hour, and we do have a few additional questions for which there won't be slides that we'd love to get your feedback on. The first one, of course, I think everybody understands this, is can we actually and effectively ask for more information from students? Would states and districts be willing to have students spend more time than the current 10-minute maximum on additional NAEP background questions to get richer contextual information related to student achievement? Do you think the additional time would be disruptive to schools and might reduce the cooperation needed to get good school samples for NAEP?
Eileen, we have a comment from Richard Ennis with Bluegrass Institute for Public Policy Solutions. Richard?
Yes, I'm on.
Great. Proceed.
My concern is about the very limited amount of information we currently get about excluded students. I'd like to see more in-depth analysis in the questions that are asked about those students, and I'd also like to see it better presented in the NCES website. At present, the exclusion information is not part of the Data Explorer. It's in a separate area of the NCES website, which makes it difficult for many to find it and access it. And it also cannot be disaggregated by race or other minority groups, which limits its utility for analysis. I don't know if anyone else has that concern, but I believe we could do a lot better in that area.
Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to follow up to what Richard has offered thus far?
Richard actually just asked a question that we want to raise too, which is how can we increase the visibility of the background information we currently have, let alone what we'd like to get, so that public policymakers can be encouraged to use it. Richard just commented that the data is difficult to obtain on the website. Are others of you having that experience? There's been NCES and governing board conversations about whether or not we should be developing apps for iPads or other online tools to improve access and the ease of use of NAEP background information. Are your districts or your contact with students or policymakers limited in that area? Is the world ready for an NCES iPad app?
Eileen, Joe McCrary commented that he has had trouble with the data online, and I wonder with your follow-up question if maybe he could elaborate on whether or not he believes an app or a similar vehicle would be of value. Joe, can you elaborate on that?
I tried to run some statistics when I online, and this was going back years ago when I was working at Policy Program Study Service with Al Ginsberg. And we ended up just ordering the disks and running the data that way. So I really can't, speak to how things are now. As far as an app goes, that's very interesting. I had not considered that in the past. I could see where there would be some interest of policymakers, especially if at the state level they could run their own state statistics, or if you're thinking of congressional staffers who might be in meetings and the question comes up, they can run it very quickly and have the information right there. So that's actually an interesting thought.
Great, thank you so much.
Are there any other thoughts on this? I'm not sure. As a State Board of Ed member, I periodically try to research our state website. I guess I shouldn't tell you which one it is. But I find it very problematic to get data easily and quickly, and NCES has been so much better with their presentation. But is there anything in particular that you would like to see facilitated on their website that would be helpful to you? Then it looks like we need to go to an app. Then my next question is regarding the NAEP Trial Urban District Assessment. I'm not sure how many of you use data from that, but are there targeted background questions that should be asked of participating students, teachers, and school administrators?
Eileen, Richard Ennis with Bluegrass Institute has a comment on that one. Go ahead, Richard.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Great.
Good. All right, because I'm doing this by phone instead of through the Internet. As far as the Trial Urban District assessments, I have been looking at that because Louisville is one of the participants, and it's a great outlier because the racial demographic in Louisville is quite unlike any other urban district. I think we need to see more information about how the urban districts really do vary from one another, even more expanded demographic information, and perhaps information on the socioeconomic status overall, and perhaps the socioeconomic status breakout even for minorities, because there's a great deal of variation in that in the cities, which it may skew the data one way or the other. I think it's extremely valuable to have trial urban district assessments out in the available spectrum of data, but it's very easy to misconstrue the findings when you don't take a look deeper.
Great, thank you very much for that. Does anyone have anything else to add on the tutor question that Eileen posed?
Then I would move on to what is really a current burning topic in a lot of different ways, international assessments and assessments in the United States. How important is it to compare NAEP background information from America's students, teachers, and schools with similar data from international assessments, such as PISA, which is certainly being discussed? Do any of you use PISA in the work that you do?
Great. Richard with Bluegrass Institute has a comment there. Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, I hate to dominate this. I guess the other participants are interested in learning information. Yes, I use it, obviously, since I'm doing analysis, and I think that gaining better congruence between questions asked in NAEP and what they're asking on the international assessments is very critical. There are concerns raised that the samples from other countries may not actually be even representative of those countries and may not be getting fairly compared to our students here in the United States. So expanding that background data information to allow us to make more informed judgments, I think, is very, very important.
Thank you very much.
Are there any other comments or questions? Then I'd like to move on to something that we have discussed talking about in these webinars, but I haven't really done so far, and that's the whole issue of in-school, out-of-school background information from students and the potential for special reports. How much relative emphasis do you think should be placed on gathering in-school versus out-of-school background information from students? And I can tell that Richard's put a lot of thought into this, and I see a comment from Lindsay.
Lindsay, go ahead, please. Lindsay's with the Austin Independent School District. Thank you, Lindsay.
Oh, yeah. Well, this comment was, it just took me a while to write it before you guys moved on to the next question, but it's just to say that I think school climate is becoming quite a hot topic, at least in our district, and I'm sure in other districts. And I think to be able to make comparisons not only with other TUDA districts but across other states, if we're looking at the state level, is important. And also if there's that information on PISA and TIMSS, I think that's an important thing to consider as well.
Thank you, Lindsay. Paula Hutton, who is with the Maine Department of Education, has a comment. Paula, please go ahead. We seem to have lost Paula. We apologize, Paula. If you have a comment or a question, please feel free to raise your hand again, and anyone else could do that as well. We might have Paula back. Paula, are you there?
And Paula, make sure your line is not muted. You are unmuted in WebEx.
Okay, Paula, try one more time. Okay, unfortunately, we're not able to hear Paula at this time. Does anyone else have a comment?
I think hopefully Paula will be able to check in on that question, but I'd like to move on to the discussion that we had on slide 21, or actually the report that Larry gave. The possibility of issuing special reports with current background information or future ones exists, and is something that the governing board wants to explore pretty adventurously, I guess should be said. The three major areas for it were learning opportunities in school, learning opportunities out of school, and benchmarking high performers. Within that context, there have been several ideas proposed for in-school, out-of-school, and high performance, and I'd like to just raise them with you and have you jump in if something hits your state or work need in a particularly good way. For high performance, we've been discussing a benchmarking study of education policies and instructional practices of high-performing and or high-growth states and urban districts. Is that something that would be valuable to you in the work that you do for children?
Richard? Bluegrass.
Yes, absolutely. That would be valuable. In fact, I'm actually working on a study right now that makes me think of an additional background item that you might want to add to the questionnaires, and that's the amount of per-pupil funding, at least at the school level. With the current economy, we're getting a lot of questions at the Bluegrass Institute, and others are as well, I suspect, about how can we do things more efficiently, because as you know, certainly in Kentucky where I'm based, more money for schools simply isn't an option right now. So I don't believe I've ever seen a background question about funding at the school level, but if we could add that in as well, then you could start looking for what we call diamonds in the rough, and those are schools that may not necessarily, of course we're talking states here, but places where we may not necessarily have the highest scores, but our bang for the buck is exceptional. And in our case, we track that against the students eligible for free and reduced lunch as well, and we have found some real surprises with that in an earlier report we did, which I'm now updating. So may I recommend that we start collecting some financial data about the schools as well.
Thank you very much for that, Richard. Joe McCrary with WestEd also has a thought on this. Joe, you may proceed.
Thank you. I think I'd like to urge some caution on this. I'm not sure how you are thinking about defining what a high performer or high growth is. Also, the current structure of NAEP doesn't allow for generalizations at the school level. And so when we're trying to identify what those high-performing schools are and look at funding, we're not really collecting data that's applicable or generalizable to the school level. And so if that's the case, then we may want to think about creating some special samples within NAEP to be able to do that.
Thank you very much. We actually have received an email chat from Paula Hutton. Paula, thank you for your persistence from the Maine Department of Education. Her comment says, in Maine, we are very interested in-school and out-of-school learning. We are a one-to-one laptop state in grades 7 to 12, and the DOE goals focus on anytime, anywhere learning in pre-K through 20. Thank you, Paula.
Are there any other conversations that we'd like to have on this particular topic? Any other comments? Then I would move on to a couple of topics that would deal with in-school. The first one is learning opportunities and school resources, including teachers, curriculum, and instruction among schools with various concentrations of students from racial or socioeconomic groups. Now, that doesn't directly touch on funding, but the resources themselves that would be leading to better education or worse. Another in-school idea is computer-delivered education, including online instruction, virtual schools, hybrid courses, and proprietary computer programs. The governing board recognizes the proliferation of many different ways of delivering education at this point. Michigan certainly is seeing an explosion of possibilities, including a whole district that, like Maine, is going to laptops in the home. Actually, I shouldn't say like Maine because I don't know Maine well enough, but we're seeing a district that is doing a blended instruction program in school and is furnishing every child at home with access to the Internet and some sort of a tablet. And we have no way to evaluate these things right now on a state level for educational quality. We will soon. But how important is this to be tracked on a national level? And how quickly do you think we would be able to have data from states that you're working in that would be useful to the country?
Eileen, Joe McCrary with WestEd would like to comment on that. Go ahead, Joe.
I'm thinking now that it would be especially relevant because of budget cuts. A lot of schools, districts, and states have sought to bring in instruction through alternative means. My concern is doing it right. It's not just a matter of there's a computer in the classroom and now there's instruction. I mean, sometimes there are all different models for doing this. And it would be how do we capture enough of the variation in the different models and be able to generalize to them. Because sometimes you've got districts who pay for a teacher to come in once a week to oversee things, or maybe once every other week. Sometimes they don't have a teacher and they just have someone on staff who monitors computer use. And so implementation, it is a real bear in measuring on some of these programs.
Fantastic. Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Joe. Are there other comments about this? Any other concerns? And in your state, how quickly do you think it would be viable to try and do measurement? Are there enough activities going on that warrant it? You can continue to respond to the questions I've raised, but I'm going to keep on raising more. I think we've already talked about the implementation of the Common Core state standards and the possibility of trying to do more with that. Is there a sense on what kind of focus report would be useful in the years coming up? Are we deeply immersed enough in Common Core to see issues arising that would be valuable for a specific report?
Richard Ennis with Bluegrass has a comment. Go ahead, Richard. Thank you.
One of the things that you're going to need to capture with that is while a lot of states now have committed to Common Core, I don't know that the implementation is proceeding at anywhere near the same pace from state to state. So just capturing the degree of implementation for at least the next several rounds of NAEP administrations would be very important. Kentucky, as I think you all know, probably was the lead state to adopt Common Core. We did it even before the final version was available for math and reading, but we will probably be in the lead as far as implementation goes, but that may not be true elsewhere, and obviously that would be very critical. And developing some metrics on how you determine the degree to which Common Core has been developed from state to state is going to be kind of a challenge.
Great. Thank you, Richard.
Are there any other questions or thoughts on that one? Then there are two more in-school studies that the Governing Board has considered. These would be actually focused reports. One would be on teacher evaluations, which in many states are taking place now for tenure. In every state, of course, is a different level of implementation on this, and I don't know where Michigan is midpoint, almost ready to do something, but hasn't quite yet. Are there comments or thoughts on teacher evaluations, a focused report on teacher evaluations? Moving on, one of the considerations as a State Board of Ed member that I've had is school safety and discipline, including the levels of suspensions and expulsions. There are reporting mechanisms for this in the U.S. Department of Education underneath civil rights, the Civil Rights Department, but there isn't anything on a national level or even in most states that examines suspensions and expulsions. It's usually graduation rates. Do you have thoughts about whether or not that would be important data to have coming through from the Governing Board?
Eileen, before we get to that one, I wanted to note that Lindsay Lamb with Austin Independent School District was simultaneously sending in a chat about your previous question regarding a special report on teacher effectiveness, and she comments that she believes it would be interesting as many districts and states are seeking out information regarding teacher effectiveness. So thank you for that, Lindsay.
So I'd welcome any more thoughts on teacher evaluations or on school safety and discipline, including suspensions and expulsions. And I also see a comment from Paula Hutton, learning inside and outside of school with technology is the future trend in Maine. We see it as inevitable in order to meet the learning needs of all students. we have, our governor is a self-styled nerd, so whenever I see learning needs, I flip it. But economics is not the sole driver in Maine. Then I'm going to move on from suspensions and expulsions to the idea. Yes.
Sorry, before we move on, Richard Ennis with Bluegrass has a comment. Go ahead, Richard.
Yes. I'm sorry, it took me a moment to realize this. As NAEP moves into more state-level 12th grade testing, I realized just a moment ago that it's absolutely critical to report on the graduation rates, dropout rates, retentions, and so forth. We're going to find more impact on the data at the 12th grade level when we go into state-by-state analysis due to the graduation rates than we have seen from possibly almost any other factor that impacts NAEP. You lose a very significant portion of the high school class between a ninth grade entry and the time that the remnant actually gets a chance to take NAEP in 12th grade. So collecting that data would be crucial. In fact, I would argue that 12th grade data at the state level without that data may be largely meaningless, so please ensure that that is done.
Thank you, Richard.
That's a great comment. Is there anything else that people would like to add about suspensions, expulsions, retentions, dropouts, graduation rates impacting 12th grade or other grades too? Then the last question that I would ask is that impacts what out-of-school behavior is happening. Learning opportunities after school and in the home, comparing students of different economic and social backgrounds. Is there a sense that a focus report on that would be of value to any of you?
Eileen, Richard with Bluegrass has a comment. Please go ahead, Richard.
Again, I hate to dominate this, but if the others are mostly wanting to listen, I will say that that is an extremely important area, and I salute you for wanting to move forward in doing that. We need especially to find out what does work for our kids in more disadvantaged environments. We're struggling with that in Kentucky, where we have plenty of kids from low socioeconomic backgrounds, but it's a national problem, and it seems to be growing. And anything NAEP can do to enrich the information in that area and maybe highlight some states or possibly urban districts that are doing an exceptional job with that would be very, very valuable.
Great. Thank you, Richard. Lindsay Lamb from Austin also commented that this would be very beneficial. Thank you, Lindsay. Joe McCrary from Wested would also like to comment. Go ahead, Joe.
Yes, it would be very interesting. I wonder, though, to the extent would the information collected be actionable? And so if we get a bunch of out-of-school behavior, what would the board be? What would the board see doing with that information?
Thank you very much, Joe.
Actually, Joe, that's a really good question. We have established a working partnership with the PTA, and there are mechanisms that we use for outreach, a substantial number of them, that would be able to convey that information. Obviously, we don't control what happens after the school day. None of us do, educators or certainly not the governing board or NCES. It has nothing to do with our work, but to give the information and allow others, parents and churches and community groups, to try to support learning would be a smart use of information. I would now ask if any of you have comments on things that we haven't touched upon in the discussions already. Are there things that you would like us to take back to the board meeting or general information for the staff and for NCES? Does anybody have any comments? I'd like to thank all of you who provided feedback today. And before we conclude, please allow me to make a few closing comments, especially the appreciation for folks who jumped in here. First, the feedback that you already have provided will be delivered and discussed at the Governing Board's next meeting, which will take place in May in San Antonio, Texas. The Governing Board will consider next steps and an implementation timeline. Finally, I'd encourage you all to send over any additional comments or feedback through either our website or our Facebook page, where we have set up a commenting feature on a page for visitors to publicly send in their thoughts. The executive summary and the full report of this group are also available on Facebook at the address listed. And I really would like to thank all of you for participating in today's webinar. Before we conclude today's discussion, is there any other closing remarks or comments that those of you who are still on, actually everybody's still on almost, for those of you who are on, would like to provide? These are very important topics for the Governing Board and for all of us. The Board is committed to improving this background question. Oh, wait a minute. Paula, yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Joe McCrary might have a closing thought for us. Joe?
Great.
I just wanted to say thank you to everyone on the board for taking the time to discuss the report with us and to take our input and to give us the chance to be heard and to explain things to us. And I really appreciate it. It's nice that when something like this comes out, that the time is made available to us to have these discussions.
Great. And also, Eileen, we had a final comment from Paula Hutton in terms of next steps. She'd like us to know that at NCSA, they're going to have a session called The Hidden Gem, where some NAEP state coordinators will be presenting on how they use NAEP contextual variable data in their state. So that's another element of this discussion we can look forward to. Thank you, Paula.
Thanks again to all of you for participating, and thank you, Joe, for making me feel like $1 million. I'm supposed to make you feel like that. The Governing Board truly values your input on this important topic. The Board is committed to improving background questions as a tool for enriching the reporting of academic results to better inform policymakers and the public alike on student achievement. Thank you so much.